Welcome, fans, to Enter the Hexadome, the fourth best podcast about Aristeia.
Welcome to Into the Hexadome. I'm Jonah, and with me again is Jason.
G'day.
Okay, so at the start of our last episode, we said that it was going to be the first of two where we were going to focus on the bottom 5 aristos and the top 5 aristos. So an apology, but it was 6 months ago today that episode came out. As Jason pointed out to me before we started recording, this has been both the longest and the quickest year ever. For those who don't know, Jason and I both work in education, but because we're on opposite sides of the world, our kind of busy and quiet periods don't align as well as we would like. But we are back today, and we're not doing the top 5 aristos. We're going to look at AGL Season 4, which launched around 2 months ago. And we're going to talk through that document. So taking on some feedback from our previous episode, we've got a bit more of a structure today. So we're going to examine the changes to the document, looking at what we think are the major changes and then some of the minor changes. We're going to have some discussion around who we think or what we think has benefited most from the changes and what we think is perhaps been most negatively impacted, and then look at the new scenario, Hunter and Prey, that has been introduced for this season. We are going to do the top 5, though, soon, aren't we, Jason?
I feel like we almost shouldn't make that promise after having so spectacularly failed in our intentions, but we do both have time now. So I think in theory, yes, people can, in fact, expect a second podcast from us before the new year.
Yes. Hold it over our heads. We're going to do it next week. We're going to commit ourselves and make sure we do it. Otherwise, we'll disappoint our, whatever the word is for single digits of fans.
I mean, is it possible to have less than one whole fan? A quarter of a fan, perhaps?
Maybe. Okie dokie. So, looking at the AGL. So AGL, for those who aren't aware, is the Aristeia Global League. It's what other systems would call the organised play document. So this is the 4th one now, and probably the one I think that's made the most significant changes to the game. Would you agree, Jace?
Yeah, I think so. This is the first time that we're really seeing an AGL document deliberately trying to change the meta and making significant changes to some of the mechanics with the intention of driving meta change. For those people out in the world who are more familiar with Infinity rather than Aristeia, this is the equivalent of the ITS doc. And those of you who are Infinity players will know well how Heloise does his best to make use of ITS to try and manipulate what's happening out in the game world of Infinity. And the Aristeia team, the A-team as they are called, have certainly tried to do that here with the Season 4 AGL.
I think the A-team means something very different for people of mine and your age, Jason.
It does indeed.
Okay, so let's start, I think, with some of the major changes that we think have happened. As I said, this came out around 2 months ago now, and I think I ran what was the very first AGL Season 4 tournament. We started the very next day after this had launched, Although, as we played on Tabletop Simulator, it took place over 6 weeks, so it probably wasn't the first to finish. But we've had some experience of playing with these rules now, which was important because we wanted to go in not just having looked at the document, but actually having played some of these as well.
Indeed.
Okay, so I think the first main change is something that was introduced in, I think, season 2, which is the change to the crit success. So this the big yellow star on the red dice, the one that can't be blocked except by a crit block. In AGL season 2, they introduced that it gave you an extra success. That's gone now. It no longer gives you an extra success. What do we think of this, Jason?
I think this is one of the best changes that has been made. I think that the extra success from a crit was problematic basically the entire time that it was in place. It worked alongside a number of other factors, including one of the other major changes that we will be discussing extraordinarily soon, to feed into a meta which was very frag heavy. And it became particularly problematic with the introduction of Lagong. Having an Aristo who was getting an automatic critical success was just too much, when that meant that they were automatically dealing a point of damage and potentially dealing a second point of damage before any other dice effects were considered.
Yeah, I think it was introduced as a way to kind of balance out what was seen as the power of the crit block. I did like it when they introduced the change, but I'm quite an aggressive player, and I think once we've gone through all of the changes, we'll perhaps have some discussion on how we think it's changed the meta and changed our play style. But I do think it did start becoming a problem, and like you say, particularly with Lagong, having it printed on his card, the first Aristo to have a crit success on his card.
Yeah, look, I was an evangelist for it early on, and I would be the first to admit that I thought that it was going to be a positive change, and I felt like it was having a positive influence very early. But certainly in retrospect, as I look back at what happened even in our local meta, we had a community where a focus on frags hadn't been as much of a thing, and that's something that transformed quite rapidly. And we saw people taking a lot more aggressive teams and letting the support aristos and controllers really slip back, and we even started to see people dropping off their use of tanks in favor of massively front stacking aggressive alpha strikes, so that they could simply wipe entire teams before they had a chance to activate, and sometimes even achieving that. We ran an event last year where the winning player had in every single game at least one round in which none of their opponent's aristos were on the board.
I think something you just said about control as well, something I saw pop up on the Discord quite a lot, and on Facebook as well, is, it's all very well controlling people via displacement or statuses, but killing is a form of control as well. You frag them and send them to the bench, and they're not there to mess with you.
Exactly, and especially if you can frag them early before they've had a chance to activate, it's the best form of control. Making someone skip a turn completely is the ultimate goal of any controller, and something that you can occasionally pull off if you place a dazzle at the right time on a ranged aristo, or you place an immobilized on the right time at the right time on a melee aristo. But it doesn't matter who you're targeting. If they're in the infirmary and missing their activation completely, then it's perfect.
Yeah, I think you've already alluded to how the change to the crit success ties into something else, and this something else is what I probably think is actually the biggest change into AGL Season 4. I think this is what you were talking to, which is the way that cards are drawn for frags now.
Absolutely. Dialing back the crit success helps dial back that focused meta, but making the change so that you no longer draw a tactic every time you get a frag immediately after getting that frag, and instead only draw one card at the end of the round, regardless of whether or not, as long as you got at least one frag. So even if you did frag the entire enemy team, you're not drawing 4 more tactics anymore. You're only drawing one, and it's only coming at the end of the round.
Yeah,
And that is so much better.
Yeah, I think it's a huge change. It's really changed the way I play the game. I think it's a good thing, even though I feel like I'm having to relearn the game. You could get on card cycles that were a bit silly. I remember one game a few months ago where I basically used all of the extra dice cards in Sterling Forge 3 times in a single game. Because I got them all quite early. I went through them all. I did reload. I went through them all again. I picked reload out of my discard pile with Wild Bill's card, and then I went through them all again. And it was just, and that can happen with these really aggressive aristos. And I think we'll talk a little bit more about that when we start talking about the biggest kind of winners and losers, if you like, of these changes. But you can't get on that card cycling path that you get from frags. It was almost like you were winning twice every time you fragged someone. So, significantly reducing the number of tactics coming through your hand. You still always get one at the end of a round. And then, as usual, you get one if you score any victory points and one if you scored any frags. Tau has been FAQ'd, so if he is the only Aristo you're killing a round, you don't get to draw one at the end of the round now. It's just
I mean, it dials that ability back very slightly, but I think that's a very, very minor sacrifice to be making for one Aristo to take a minor step back. In terms of the overall benefit to the game, I agree wholeheartedly that this is good. And to those people who have been arguing that this means that frags just don't matter anymore, I would remind everyone that frags are the tiebreaker in every game. Getting more frags will win you games. I have won nearly as many games in actual tournament play off of the number of frags as I have off of the number of objective points that I've achieved in a scenario. It's very, very common, especially in my local meta, for us to end on the same points, and for the matches to be decided by frags. And that's such a big deal.
Absolutely. And some scenarios still reward you victory points for getting frags. And
exactly.
Of course, we've already mentioned the kind of control you can exert by, having more aristos in any given round than your opponent. So frags are still important, but I do think, as you alluded to a bit earlier, it shifted the meta so that it's allowed more control pieces to have a bit more of a place. Frags are not pointless, but they are a little less important. And like you, I think that's a good thing, even though it's massively impacted on myself.
Yeah, it's very significant changes to playstyle. I played a game just this morning in the latest season 5 of the Aristeia Global League on TTS, and for basically the first time ever, I ran a pretty much pure control team to an 8-0 win in Assault. It was crazy.
Yeah, and in the tournament that I ran, I know one of my local players actually, although he's from Sweden originally, Glenn, who's known as Brumnar on the Discord. He ran a complete control team in one of his rounds and won that, and indeed he won the whole tournament, taking some lesser used picks like Corey Queen and Eclipse, who have got a slight buff from this season, as we'll discuss.
More than slight, I'd argue, in those two cases. But we'll get onto that topic a little bit later. I think the other thing that's a really, really major change is the tournament points. Do you want to explain how that has been done differently for this season?
Yeah, so in a tournament or a league, which are slightly different things, and we'll have a bit of discussion on leagues. You get points for winning, you get points for losing, for drawing rather. So normally it's 3 points for a victory, 1 point for a draw, and no points for a defeat. So a little bit like football, proper football that you play with your feet. In case there's anyone out there who thinks it's something else. But this year they've introduced a couple of new things. You get +1 tournament point if you score 5 or more victory points in a game. And the important thing to note about that is both players can get that. So even if you lose, you could still get the offensive bonus if you scored more than 5 victory points in your loss. And there's also something called the defensive bonus. So again, using a sport analogy, this is a bit like the losing bonus point that you get in rugby if you're within 7 points of the opposition. So if you lose by less than 2 victory points, you get +1. And obviously that's only applicable to the loser. So as a winner, you could get 3 or 4 victory points. And if you lose, you could still get potentially, tournament points, not victory points. And if you lose, you could still get 2 tournament points. And I think this is quite a good system. We used it for the tournament that I ran. It didn't make any difference at the top, but in the kind of middle order and towards the bottom, it did shift it a little bit from what it would have been in previous seasons, as those who kind of lost those much more closely fought games were kind of rewarded for kind of being in it right until the end.
Yeah, it certainly made. I did not have a good showing in that tournament, which I think maybe to a certain extent partly reflects the fact that I didn't have my head around the changes when I went into that event, and went in with a team that was definitely not suited to the new environment. But nevertheless, it ended up doing much better than I expected, despite losing most of the games purely because of this. It really does make a big difference that if you can keep your victory points up, and if you can keep yourself within cooey of the victory points that your opponent is scoring, as the losing player, picking up 2 tournament points each round can make a really big difference to where you end up in the overall field at the end.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't do particularly well in the tournament either. I won 2 games and lost 4. And I've won several tournaments previously, but in all of the games that I lost, I picked up 2 tournament points. I was within 2 of my opponent, and I had also scored over 5 victory points. So all my games were close. I'd love to say some dice abandoned me, or the new changes affected my losses. I may not have adapted to them, but they were all deserved losses in those words. But I finished 11th out of 20, so solidly mid-table, even though I lost 4 games.
Yeah. And there you go. I think that exactly that is a real reflection of the strength of the system. When it was being discussed in the Walker Forum before this was released, it was very, very openly being referred to as rugby scoring, and I think that moving to a rugby scoring system is a great choice. It keeps people engaged. It keeps people enthusiastic. It keeps everyone fighting to the very end of every match, and it keeps them engaged through the length of a tournament as well, because it's easier for people to stay within like a reasonable distance of coming, top 3, top 5, even if they aren't doing well at the beginning.
Yes, absolutely. I think it was disheartening for some people to kind of, you can lose a game in like the very last activation of the very last round, and just not get rewarded for it at all. And we've all had those really, really close games that are really enjoyable, and we don't mind losing, but then you just think, well, could I not have been rewarded with something at least? And I like this system a lot. And
it was true that, yes, if you were close to your opponent's score, they got 1 less victory point. But that's not satisfying for me as the player who has lost. I guess sometimes there might be a certain dark satisfaction in knowing that my opponent has done less well, but I think it is a much better thing to have a positive reward for the player who has kept their score close than it is to punish the winner.
Yeah, I agree. And in another system that I play, there's been a lot of debate at the moment on kind of which system to use for tie breaks, whether you use victory points or whether you use strength of schedule. And a lot of the debates around there have basically been the way that different systems encourage noob stomping. And I think the old AGL system, where you kind of you lost a you lost a tournament point if you beat someone, but they were quite close to you, just encouraged you to try and steamroller people. Whereas I think now, as long as you beat someone, you get all your associated tournament points. It doesn't encourage you to not allow people to have take backs or to not point things out if they've forgotten something, which I think is a positive thing. We should be encouraging people to play the game and inviting new people in. And we got quite a few people in on the tournament that I ran that hadn't played in tournaments before, and a couple who'd only had a handful of games, and they're in the new league we've just started as well. So that's a good thing. We want as many people to play the games as possible.
Now, there are a number of other changes to the states and our everyone's favorite attack form. Shall we start with that one?
Yeah, well, I think I've got the change to the attack as a minor thing, but I think states are probably the last major change that we need to talk about. So,
yes, no, fair enough, true, very true. The states are certainly a much more significant change.
Yes, so going in the order that they are on the document, and I think the most significant one as well is the change. I've just realised these aren't alphabetical.
They're not.
And maybe this is the order of importance that Corvus Belli think they're in. But the first change is to stunned. So previously, if you were stunned, you always lost a success from your rolls. That has changed now. The rules have written targets affected by this state must cancel one symbol of their opponent's choosing from each of their rolls. So you can now cancel a success, a block, or a special. What do we think about this, Jason?
It's huge. This is literally game reshaping for every Aristo who can deliver the stunned state. It takes stunned from being something that had a fairly significant effect on some support Aristos. Some support Aristos leaned quite heavily into their successes and had dice pools that were significantly weakened by losing one success. Hexa is an excellent example of that. Boy, oh boy, did she hate the old version of stunned. But there were others that it basically didn't really impact at all. Fiddler, for example, just doesn't care, despite using similar sorts of dice pools. But this now is not only something that dials back the offensive potential or activation potential of Aristos, but it also cripples their defense, and it can be used to cripple their ability to activate switches as well. And being able to choose which you do on the fly is just fantastic.
Yeah, it's a brilliant change. On paper, in the document, it looks pretty good, and having played now a fair bit with it, it is amazing. I mean, I took Laxmi a lot anyway. I think she's a fantastic Aristo. For not only for stunned and focus, but for her state removal. But the changes to stunned are huge, and being able, like you said, to look. So I mean, Hexa still hates it. She needs those stars, and she only rolls yellow dice for Vade Retro. But when you get those turns where she doesn't roll stars, but you think, oh, well, I can displace because of my switch, and your opponent says, oh, no, you can't, because I'm going to cancel that shield, or I'm going to cancel that exclamation mark. It is absolutely huge. It is so good in play. It's such a useful state now, and has really impacted on some Aristos, as we'll discuss in a little bit.
I think the thing that I like most about this is that it, for all that we've just spent the last 15 minutes talking about how the fragging game has been dialed back. This really enables a number of aristos who have either a primary or secondary support role to actually help their offensive aristos to be more effective. And that's going to come up again in a minute when we talk about one of the other states that has changed. But I really like the idea of teams working together to be more effective through coordinated action. And I think that this change encourages that.
And I think that's an important point, is that although we're talking about each of these changes almost in isolation, they are absolutely interrelated into a kind of bigger pattern of the way it's shifted the meta and changed the game.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so the next one in the document is Dazzled. And
which hasn't actually changed.
I was going to say, I like to think I'm a fairly intelligent guy. It's not changed, right? I'm not misreading that. It is
okay.
exactly the same.
There was a very I wish I could. I scoured for about an hour trying to find. There was a really, really annoying, obscure way of reading the previous wording, which was being interpreted by a couple of groups internationally to mean something that wasn't intended. And so the wording has just been very slightly tweaked to be like, no, that thing that you're saying isn't correct.
Okay.
It's just a language cleanup, so we can move on from it completely.
Excellent. Good. Okay. I'm not going mad because, like you, I looked at it and I was just like, this is the same, isn't it? Okay.
Yeah, it is.
Marked has changed slightly. So marked now reads: targets affected by this state may be targeted even without line of sight. Targets affected by this state cannot benefit from cover. And then the new rules for marked: characters that perform an action against a target affected by this state may only reroll a die from their roll if they are not in contact with the target and they or their allies have imposed the target state affecting the target. So that's particularly important for Prism. So she marks herself at the end of her activation. So you wouldn't get this bonus.
It was it was play tested without that wording, and then it was pointed out that Prism was very, very, very sad. So I think that minor tweak is very good. But the idea that when you mark targets, you are also giving your allies rerolls. Fantastic. Absolutely brilliant. Exactly like I just said with Stunned, this is a classic example of an opportunity for teams to work together to bring down a target, and I want to see more of that in Aristeia. So, bravo from me.
I think it's the other way around from what you say, because it says characters that perform an action against a target affected by this state may only re-roll a dice if they're not in contact. So it doesn't give you a re-roll. It means that melee aristos can't do any rerolls when they're attacking marked targets.
Oh.
That might have changed, because I think I saw a document where it did give you rerolls. Or are you getting confused with Hidden? Because Hidden does allow rerolls.
Oh. Wow, you're right. The wording of that is different from what I had thought and different from what I think I have been playing, though fortunately not recently. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, so I'm not convinced this change was needed if I was honest, but essentially it means, in perhaps clearer language, that if you're adjacent to someone who's marked, you're not allowed to reroll dice. You can only reroll dice if you're not adjacent, which means Wild Bill is still just as good at killing Prism.
But Musashi is less good at killing Prism because Musashi now can't use rerolls.
Correct. Yes, which I Makes sense with Prism that you're blinded by them. I'm not sure how else that works thematically. It's a fairly minor change, I think. You don't see an awful lot of marked. Maybe you'll see some more of it because of Eclipse coming back into the picture a little bit, but
True. I mean, I think the biggest thing with the limited amount of marked we've seen is that the two main aristos who use it offensively anyway, Bichet and Eclipse, have been very, very bottom of the meta, as we discussed 6 months ago.
yes, we did. Okay, so let's move on to Hidden, which has seen a fairly good change. So each line of sight to the targets affected by the state are considered locked except from range 0 to 1. So you can't attack hidden people unless you're adjacent to them.
It's just slightly improved wording. It's good.
Yes. You targets affected by this state cannot gain cover, so you can't be hidden and in cover, and that's going to be quite important with the next bit, which is that hidden characters may roll 1 dice for every combat roll and for their action rolls when they are targeting an enemy, which is quite a big change and going to make quite a big difference to a couple of aristos.
Yeah, it really does. It's very, very helpful, especially for Dart.
Yes.
I think this takes her and puts her firmly into the mid-range of the range striking options. And I think she's the biggest beneficiary.
Yeah, she excels when attacking whilst hidden, and I think she's the primary reason why you can't also gain cover when you're hidden because of her switch.
Yeah.
And the final bit of hidden is just even while you are hidden, you still block line of sight. So even though you can't be seen, you are still there.
Yeah, it's that part of it's interesting. I still find that particular interaction to be a little bit counterintuitive myself, but fine. It's fine as a rule, even if it doesn't make sense in my head.
Yes, thematically, I'm not sure actually. I mean, thematically, really, if they were blocking line of sight, they need to take the bullet to the head that's supposed to be aimed at someone else, right? But in rules terms, that would be difficult to do, I think. So it's a kind of elegant solution to that.
Yeah, I guess so. Shrug. It's definitely far from the most egregious issue of the rules not quite aligning with some sort of perceived realism. So we're in the Hexadome. Realism need not apply.
Okay, so moving on to the final state that has seen a change, and like the one we started with, which was stunned, I think silenced has had quite a significant change. So the wording rather now reads: the player that imposes this state must choose one of the target's actions other than move. So you used to not be able to silence attacks, but you can now, with a caveat that I'll get to in a moment, or automatic skills. Whilst under the effect of this state, the target cannot perform nor apply the effects of the chosen action or automatic skill. So you can attack when you're silenced, even though the attack can be silenced. However, you cannot apply any automatic things off the attack. So Axel, I think, is a good example of this. He can give out -2 move automatically on his attack just for declaring it. Can't do that when he's silenced. You also cannot declare any switches off your attacks when silenced, which I think is a huge change.
I think the best example of an Aristo who this affects significantly is Valkyrie. Valkyrie's charge of the Valkyrie attack, literally every part of it that is good stops functioning. You no longer add extra orange dice. You no longer negate a shield, and you no longer get to displace. all of the effects, automatic and activated effects, simply shut down. And so all she is doing is rolling a single red dice, where previously it would have been, obviously a much better attack.
Yeah, there's an irony there because if you've played Valkyrie, and Valkyrie's probably my second favorite Aristo, I absolutely love her. You don't usually get to use the final one. You don't get to displace next to your opponent very often because you've usually just obliterated them with a red and 3 orange dice.
Exactly.
And now you'd probably be able to do it if you're only attacking with 1 red, but you can't if you've been silenced. So poor Valk, but she's still brilliant. I'm not sure we should feel too much sympathy for her.
And to be fair, there is still only the one Aristo who can silence people, and as long as it's only Oberon dealing this state out, I think there's a limit to how much of it we're going to see in games. But at the same time, I do wonder how long that's going to stay true. There is discussion again of when we will see new Aristos, and I think there's a good chance that we will see some in the not ridiculously far distant future. And I think Silenced is an example of a state that we will almost certainly see another Aristo pick up.
Yeah, when I read this, it screamed future-proofing to me because I thought the same as you. It's just Oberon at the moment, and Aristeia releases have slowed down recently. Corvus Belli have been focused on the launch of the new edition of Infinity, and they've got the Defiant Kickstarter, which I think is due to come some point soonish.
Yeah, the Australians already have it, the Americans are getting it right now, and the rest of the world is waiting for an unknown amount of time.
Yeah, so understandably, their focus has been elsewhere, although, they got a lot of Aristos out into the game with a really kind of fast-paced release schedule, soon after the game's launch. So I've kind of appreciated the break, actually, give us some time to play with what's there, but I'm sure some are coming. I hope some are coming, and this definitely screamed future-proofing to me.
Absolutely.
I think we've covered the major changes in the AGL document. So shall we go through some of the minor changes?
Well, without changing the page, let's talk about everyone's least favorite attack.
Yes, the contender, everybody. It's still 1 orange dice, but so powerful and strong was this attack, so game-winning, that they've had to reduce the range from 1 to 8 to 1 to 6.
To be fair, because of my tendency to run Hannibal quite a lot, I have actually gotten a reasonable number of frags with contender shots.
And if you throw cards in, you can. I actually had a situation where this affected me, and I was sad that contender wasn't range 1 to 8 in a game of Capture the Flag in the tournament. It was basically I had to try and kill the I think Moonchild, who had the flag. It was like my last desperate attempt to try and win the game, and I only had Laxmi that could do it, and she couldn't get within range 6. Sorry, if it had been range 8, I'd have been able to take that shot and maybe have done something. But broadly, I don't think it's going to affect the game that much. It's kind of good when Prism's around. We've talked about Prism already. It means that you've got, if Prism's a bit further away from you, you're not so easily automatically having to shoot her a low.
Oh no, this doesn't affect Prism because Prism's ability only kicks in within range 5 anyway.
Oh, of course it does. Yes, I thought it was the switches that were only range 5. Yes.
Yeah, no, hilariously, the one person who most often gets shot with contenders will continue to be shot at with contenders with exactly the same regularity as before.
Yeah, I'm not sure what the thinking was, but it's a minor thing. It's unlikely to have much effect on the game, I think. And even in that example that I just gave, I was almost certainly not going to be able to shoot and frag Moonchild with my contender anyway. It was just something that I was aware of.
I think the one thing that it does do that I see as a positive is it helps to pick out Major Luna as a little bit more special. She is now literally the only Aristo in the game that can reach out to range 8. And I think that is good, because I think that she is an Aristo who needs a little bit of help. And I think allowing her to stand head and shoulders above literally everyone else in terms of the ability to reach out and touch someone is a positive.
Yeah, that's a good point. The other very minor change is that they've just clarified re-rolls. So there's been several things introduced in the game that allow you to re-roll dice, and most notably the Omadon Arena, and of course there's cards that allow you to do it as well. And also mentions things like skills. So I wonder if perhaps, again, this is a bit of future-proofing, but it's just to clarify, you can only re-roll a dice once.
I think, again, this is good. All of the recent reroll abilities, so for example, the new standard decks, those make it clear that if you use the reroll, you can't then reroll the dice again. But there were a handful of things. So the original standard deck, for example, and now I've forgotten the name of the tactic.
Fortune favors the badass.
That's the one. Fortune favors the badass doesn't actually have that restriction printed on the card. So there was an implication that you could use it to re-roll something that you'd already re-rolled, but it didn't explicitly say that you couldn't. I think it's nice just to have a consistent rule that applies across the board. Once you have re-rolled a dice, that's it. Full stop.
Yeah, and I think if you play quite a lot of different games like we do, it's a system you're pretty familiar with in almost all games, not all of them, because one that I play, you are allowed to re-roll from different sources, but in most games, you're only ever allowed to re-roll a die once. So I think it's just a nice, clear ruling. Okay, the next minor thing, I think, is just the audience point costs within leagues. So for those not familiar, leagues are a slightly different way of playing the game, where you hire aristos and you can buy different equipment, and we're going to talk about some of that equipment in a moment.
I think I should pause you for a second, because there are just generic leagues, and what we are now talking about is the AGL manager mod for a league.
Yes, good point. Thank you for clarifying that. Yes.
Yep.
The only league I've actually played in is the AGL Manager League, and we've just seen some minor changes to the cost to hire different aristos, and I'm pretty sure that the only change is Legong and Moonchild, who in the previous document, which came out around the same time as those aristos, they only cost 10 audience points, which was far too cheap. And
it
now
was egregious.
16. Yes, they cost 16 now, which is the maximum cost of any aristo in the pack. So,
I don't think you will find a single person who disagrees with either of those choices. Though I dare say there are some other curious costings now. Once we take all of the effects of the new Season 4 AGL state changes into consideration, I certainly think, for example, Oberon is worth a lot more than the 4 you have to pay for him.
Absolutely, yeah. So Moonchild and Legong are the only 2 changes.
Yeah.
I agree, they perhaps should have changed some others. Oberon at 4 that's the cheapest. 16 is the max. You also have 6 and do you have 8? I think you just have 6, 10, and 16. Oberon should be 16 now.
Yeah.
Which
was Lakshmi 16 in the previous?
She was.
In the previous season. Oh, she was. Okay.
I think because of her interaction with other 16 audience point aristos.
I think maybe when they first introduced this mod 2 years ago, she was 10 and she went up to 16. That feels like a change that happened at some point. But anyway, Moonchild and Legong then would be the only 2 changes.
Yeah.
They shouldn't have been the only two changes, but they are.
Yeah, if anyone, I recorded an episode of Into the Hexadome when the mod was first introduced with Andrew. If people want to go back through and hear some of my thoughts on the league, I love the league format. I think it's such a fun way to play the game. And Martin, who is Harlequin of Death on the Discord and on the forums, is running the league that we're playing in now, the AGL Manager League, and he's actually altered the points for the Aristos for that league. So Oberon does cost that 16 that he probably should do in the official document.
It's good.
We'll discuss Oberon very soon. I think the next minor change is the scenarios. So in each AGL, Corvus Belli rotate out and in the different scenarios that can be used. It's worth noting that there's still kind of open tournaments and open leagues where you can play any that you want, but in kind of standard or official ones, you're only supposed to use the list that they provide, which has seen quite a big change this year. So King of the Hill, Carnage, Broken Land, and Frenzied Dance have all been removed, but only 2 have come in. So Conquest has come back in, and a new scenario, which we'll discuss towards the end of the podcast, Hunter and Prey, has come in.
But I think it's interesting. Mostly, I think the one that we're really going to miss is King of the Hill.
Yes, maybe we'll discuss this with Hunter and Prey. I think King of the Hill had some issues with snowballing, but I don't think Hunter and Prey has actually resolved them in the way perhaps it could have. But if you look at them, most of them, Carnage and Broken Land and King of the Hill to an extent, were all quite frag-orientated scenarios. So that speaks more to that kind of shift in the meta that we've already been talking about. I'm kind of sad to see them go, to be honest. I'm in favour of new ones coming back in, but I haven't found a scenario that I don't like, with the exception of the poorly written human target. So I wish they would just give us a choice of more. Just let us play with all of them like we do in open tournament. But I think the kind of rotation of scenarios for that sort of focused competitive meta is fine.
Yeah, I would agree. While I would like to see more options available, I quite like the idea that we're cycling in and cycling out and trying to make improvements to the ones that we've got. And I think that generally speaking, the minor tweaks, the minor changes, for example, that were made to Conquest, which I think help it to be a little more balanced and help people stay in the game, especially if they take frags. Interestingly,
we should talk about Conquest actually as well as Hunter and Prey when we talk about scenarios, because that has changed. But I think I'm not an Infinity player like Jason, but I think you made the comparison to the ITS seasons earlier, and this is what happens in ITS, isn't it? You have missions that are cycled in and out.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's and I've always seen that as a positive aspect of the ITS, and I think it works well here as well.
Okay, the final thing that we think is relatively minor in the effect it's going to have on the game, but Jason and I have some disagreement here on whether this is a good thing or not, is sponsors. So for those who are not familiar, you used to acquire sponsorship of different companies or also different nations. If you played a lot with an Aristo, or depending on your result in tournaments. They are gone now. The sponsor system isn't in the kind of standard tournament and standard league rules. It is in the AGL Manager League rules, where you can use audience points to buy yourself sponsorship. But it's gone from regular play, if you like. I think this is a good thing. Jason, you don't.
Yeah, no, I think that there were some issues with sponsors, and I will acknowledge that there was an issue where basically players who neither did particularly well in tournaments nor did particularly badly in tournaments, and just kind of ended up middle of the pack, missed out on getting access to the special sponsors. But I think that that was a resolvable issue. And I think that rather than getting rid of sponsors, which I've always found to be a relatively interesting component of Aristeia play, especially when they had just last season introduced the idea of national sponsorship. I think getting rid of the whole concept completely is a mistake, and I think it strips a little bit of the flavor out, and it pulls out a little bit of the. I'm always into injecting a little bit of role playing into everything I do, and I think that it pulls a little bit of that kind of special flavor element out of the way that we engage with our Aristeia teams. I think we've already seen people having a little bit less fun with naming their teams and building logos for their teams and all those sorts of aspects of the game that we saw a lot of early on. And I think that ditching the sponsors is part of that. We don't have that same feeling of engagement with our team.
Yeah, see, I agree with a lot of what you've said. I like the flavour aspect of it. But in AGL Season 2, when this was first introduced, you basically only got sponsorship by doing well in tournaments. So,
Oh, no, sponsors have been in the game since Season 1.
oh, was it Season 1? Okay.
Yeah, sponsors have been there from the beginning.
But yeah, well, so when I started playing, I did relatively well in a couple of local tournaments mainly because I'd picked the game up a bit earlier than anyone else. So I all of a sudden got some sponsorship awards, but I would just never get to use them because people would always take the counter sponsor, which you always had, which got cancelled, and then they got rid of that. You lost that after you'd played in 2 tournaments. You couldn't negate your opponent's sponsorship. But like you said, they iterated it so there were more ways to get it. But it was just always if you were in the middle of the row, you just wouldn't get anything. You either needed to be doing really well or have a really bad day at a tournament to actually benefit from it. It was always tied to doing the most or doing the least at something.
Yeah.
And there was that, play in Aristo a lot and you can get nation sponsorship, which was kind of interesting and a good way to protect your favoured Aristo. Although I know that you, and this will probably be a topic on a different podcast, we have quite a disagreement over the use of Zlavin as a mod. And if you don't have a banning, as I know your meta very often doesn't, then that nation protection is functionally useless. So I don't know.
Oh, I mean, it did also work for Zlavin.
Well, yes, I know, yes, but what I'm saying is it only works if you're using Zlavin. So if, like your meta, you weren't using any banning, then the sponsorship didn't help you because you weren't getting Aristos banned in the first place.
Yeah, I mean, there was also the Corey Queen mod, which allowed you to straight up ban Aristos, which you could protect against.
Yeah.
And obviously, we've also seen what have people been calling the mod?
The MOBA mod.
Yeah, the MOBA mod, which is an unofficial fan designed mod, but one which I believe is very popular. And I dare say we'll see the MOBA mod appear officially in an AGL document in the future.
I mean, it is referenced in this AGL document, even though it doesn't appear in it.
Yes.
And we did use it in the tournament that I ran, but it's not official yet. So I think perhaps we won't talk about it in the context of this AGL, but we will talk about it on a future episode.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, definitely.
But I like that it's in the AGL Manager mod in the league play, because league play isn't as balanced as, if you like, properly competitive play because of the way you can structure team and get audience points. But as I said, it's a really enjoyable way to play the game. I really enjoy the AGL Manager League, and I like that the sponsors are in that, that you can just buy them and then they can have some effect in a game where there's kind of less at stake, I guess. It depends how seriously you take tournaments, I guess. But I think they just... It was the easiest thing to do was just remove them from standard tournament play, because it meant that they didn't need to think of new options for getting yourself to get sponsors, to get access to sponsors that some people just weren't getting.
Yeah, I agree. It was definitely the easiest way to do it, but I think that they had already stumbled on the right way to go about it when they had introduced the national sponsorship last season. When you gained sponsorship from a nation by playing a specific Aristo a certain number of times, and I think that concept could have then been duplicated for some of the other special sponsors. So, for example, you could have gotten access to a sponsor when you had achieved a minimum of 10 frags in tournament games, for example.
Yeah. My only concern there is then perhaps you end up having to have too many sponsors. But I do like them in league play. It'll be interesting to see if they make a return in general play. Okay, so that's the changes to the AGL itself. I think as we've gone through, probably covered our thoughts in terms of how it shifted the game. I think frags are of less importance, and it's brought in those control aristos more. How do you feel overall about it? Are you happy with it? Do you like the changes?
2 years ago, I would have hated this. And I would have thought that it was a terrible mistake. But with my current understanding of the game and the way I see the meta today, I think that this is an excellent series of choices. And I think that people are correct to read into this that this is pointing towards the design intention of Aristeia going forward. There's definitely an intent here to push the meta deliberately in a direction, and there is definitely an active intent to try and improve some of the aristos who weren't doing so well. And an active attempt to pull down slightly some of the aristos that were doing a little too well. And I think that both of those things are being achieved here.
Yeah, I think when I talk to people about Aristeia, and I've managed to kind of quite successfully recruit quite a few people into the game, it's ultimately, at its core, a game about positioning and being in the right place at the right time. That's what most of the scenarios are about. But fragging and taking aristos off the board was a very successful way of making sure you had the most people in the right place. And I think that has, as you've just described, shifted the meta away from what is the core of the game, the interesting thing about control and displacement, to let's just obliterate people, get them off, and then I can go stand somewhere and they can't because they're not on the board. And it has shifted that a lot and brought in control options a lot more. And I feel like I'm relearning the game. I typically used to play with quite an aggressive play style where I would try and push ahead for victory points very early, get as many as I could, as quickly as I could, usually by trying to remove people, the likes of Mushashi and Bill and Valkyrie. And because of the changes to frags, that has really changed my game quite a lot. And I don't think I've caught up yet. I don't think I'm fully on board with the changes to AGL Season 4, because I don't think I've played quite enough yet. But I think that's a good thing. I think it's evolving the game, and it's challenging the player base, and it's challenging me. And it's going to allow people to use a bigger variety of aristos, which is, something we've discussed in regards to the different formats. It is the dominance of certain aristos. Okay.
In terms of who is really being picked up here, I think we would be remiss not to point out that some of the aristos who previously have been overlooked a lot, um, the the likes of Corey Queen and Eclipse especially, they are significantly improved here. Oberon had already, to a certain extent, become a bit of a meta pick, simply because of his ability to counter Lei Gong, and the overwhelming dominance of Lei Gong late in the last season. But I think that Oberon's amazing now, and my last couple of games where I have run Oberon have every single time he has had a game shaping impact.
Yeah.
And I've always had a lot of respect for Lakshmi, and boy oh boy has she only gotten better.
Yeah, well, I guess that segues into the next section of the podcast today is who's benefited most from the changes. Now, I think Corey Quee and Eclipse and also Final Boss have benefited. They put out the states that have benefited most from the changes, but I don't think they are the things that have benefited most from the change per se. I think I am in agreement with you that Oberon has benefited probably the most. And I agree Laxmi as well. And I've also got a couple of other things I think have most benefited. But should we talk about Oberon first and just exactly why he's benefited so much from this?
Okay, so first things first, we are now in a game where card draw is much more valuable. You simply can't get your draw by killing people anymore, which is how a lot of players played the game, you and I included.
Yeah.
So an Aristo one of whose major functions is pulling cards out of your deck, it instantly becomes significantly more valuable in this season. And so right there, Oberon's generic switch, which allows you to pull extra tactics, and his most expensive ability, which allows you to fish through your deck and pull out a tactic of your choice, and possibly also, obviously, if you hit your switch at the same time because you're rolling dice to do it, also maybe to draw an extra tactic. Both really, really solid abilities.
You'll remember when dreaming it is the one that lets you go through your deck and get a card out, and it is so good now in a game where, as you say, card draw is much harder. He's arguably taken an ever so slight nerf because his ability I'm Hope, which is when an ally makes a simple roll, you can discard a card to add a yellow dice to their roll. Obviously, cards are more precious now, so that ability is somewhat nerfed. But also, I've used Oberon a lot and never used that ability. So,
I have used that ability, and I have found it very useful at times. But at the same time, it's it's almost laughable in comparison to so already it's obvious why Oberon is now very, very valuable in the meta. But you'll forget when waking is just bonkers. It's applying the improved silence state, which we've already discussed as being incredible. It has a switch to drop even more silenced onto the table, which again can be very effective. But it's also got a switch to drop out either stunned or dazzled, which is just brilliant.
and his generic switch to draw a card, because his draw a card switch is just a generic switch. It's not actually on your Remember When Dreaming. So, just a quick note on silence. I saw this asked on the Discord the other day about whether you can silence multiple abilities on a target. You cannot silence the state, and you're only allowed one state on you, with the exception of fire and poison.
Yeah.
Unless you're...
Yeah, exactly. Obviously, you can apply a second silenced state, and then you would be able to change the ability that is currently silenced,
Yes.
because a new state will override an old state. But no, you can't have more than one thing silenced at a time.
Yeah. In another game that I play, they often rank things in tiers based by letter, kind of on like computer games. You have like D, C, B, A, and then S tier. And I think Oberon was probably an A tier before. He was just outside that top group, but still really good. He is absolutely catapulted into that S tier now with these changes. Spoiler for our next episode, he wouldn't have been in my top 5 Aristos in AGL 3. He is in my top 5 in AGL 4. I think he is just absolutely incredible. And he was someone I was already playing a lot anyway.
Yeah, no, I would agree wholeheartedly.
Yeah. Okay. So the next one on my list was someone you've already mentioned, who is Laxmi. I think she's been had a big benefit from this change. And again, be someone who was not being taken before.
Well, I think it kind of depends on where you are in the world. Lakshmi was certainly very high in the pick rate for the Spanish meta, and certainly seemed to be very popular in Europe anyway. Lakshmi already had amazing synergy with Musashi and Wild Bill, who were pretty close to, if not at the top of the food chain in the previous season. Adding extra yellow dice onto people who can get extra attacks from their switches is pretty bonkers. But yeah, the enhancement to stun just makes Lakshmi crazy good.
Yeah. Someone who really, really likes having focus, by the way, is Oberon.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
But yeah, I mean, Laxmi was already a great Aristo. You saw her getting taken a lot with Lei Gong because of silence on Lei Gong and on dazzle on him. You put a focus on him first, and because of Laxmi's ability, you can just get rid of that focus, which Lei Gong doesn't really benefit a huge deal from in order to get rid of those really debilitating statuses. Laxmi still has Atom, which is one of the best cards in the game. So I think she's been a big beneficiary of these changes because she was already strong and has got stronger.
Yeah, I'd point to Lakshmi as basically an accidental beneficiary. I think she was already strong and didn't need the buff. While basically everyone else who benefited really, really did. But fine, I'm willing to accept that alongside the significant benefits that we're seeing to some other aristos who weren't basically being played.
Yeah, I think what you've just described actually was my first thought when I saw this change was, well, hang on, Laxmi doesn't need to get any better, but it does make, as we've said, a number of other ones better. I've got 2 more that I think have been major beneficiaries. Have you got any more you want to shout out before I introduce those?
Well, Corey Queen would be my next. She is somebody who I have had a lot of success with after having put effort into basically learning how she worked and getting my head around how to get mileage out of her. And this will not be the first time, even on this podcast, that I have sung her praises and argued that she's much better than a lot of people believed. But boy, oh boy, has she gotten better now that her now that stunned is significantly boosted, because I mean that's obviously a core component of what makes her effective as an aristo.
Well, and hidden as well. The other
yes.
big bonus, yeah. Just thinking about the tournament that I ran again, and Glenn, who won the tournament, he took, I believe, both Eclipse and Corey Queen because he was keen to try them out in the new meta, and played with them both quite a bit, I think, and did have success with them. So
well, they've got amazing synergy. Corey Queen pulling hidden at the beginning of every round, as long as she can maintain her positioning correctly, is great. But it doesn't function defensively. But if you've got Eclipse activating next to then flip that hidden back over, offering her defensive protection as well, it's just brilliant. And that's a synergy that I have long taken advantage of myself.
I have to say, Corey Queen wasn't on my list,
Oh,
but
wasn't she?
no, the next one on my list was Tau, Mr. Obnoxious himself.
Interesting. Why do you think that Tau has benefited so significantly here?
Well, I love Tau anyway. I'll put that out there. I've been a big singer of his praise for a while, but it's so easy to force people to drop cards now. Sorry, it's so much more important when you force them to drop cards.
Oh, it's so much more punishing. That's
Yeah,
actually a really good call.
yeah, I think he's probably just on the cusp of being a major beneficiary. He hasn't benefited quite as much as Oberon and Laxmi, and a lot of these characters we're talking about are very squishy. They are vulnerable to frags. You often don't take, more than one, maybe two in a team, so you're unlikely to see all these together. But yeah, Tau just forces you to drop cards, and he forces you to do that consistently and annoyingly, and that is much more much more important now. If you're forcing your opponent to drop cards, they are not getting new ones at anywhere near the rate that they used to.
That's a really good call. Actually, that might also be a boost to the TCOM tactics deck.
Well, that is my final. That was my final thing. My
Oh,
fourth.
really?
Yes. Yeah. Should we talk about TCOM now?
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, so TCOM is one of the three standard decks that you can choose from. So you've got the standard, the Sterling Forge, and the TCOM. And in my mind, Sterling Forge and the standard deck that comes to the base game were on about a par in the previous season of AGL when they were introduced. And TCOM was just a little bit below that. It was good in the right team builds, but it just wasn't as consistently good. However, I think it has seen a really big buff now, and it's on a par. I think all three of those decks are worthwhile, and I used TCOM in half of my games in the previous tournament. So there's two reasons I think TCOM have really benefited from these changes. So the first is it allows you to do card cycling. So when you add one of the dice cards to your roll, you get to draw the top two cards off your deck, and then you can place any cards from your hand, two of them, on the top or the bottom. And that card cycling is really important in allowing you to get key cards. Because what I found with the standard deck is I'm not drawing as many cards as I would in normal play because of the changes to frags. So I've not made it through my deck anymore, and very commonly I would get all the way through my deck in a game. Very often, by round 3, I'd be drawing the last card of my deck.
Well, I used to advocate for Hannibal purely on the basis not just because he was so effective at synergizing with a high frag meta, but also because he gave you a tech that let you recycle your deck.
Yeah.
And that was I saw that as a really major advantage to running him in teams.
Yeah, I agree. And the other thing I think is what you were touching on in relation to how it compares with Tau is that there are a couple of cards in TCOM that force your opponent to drop cards, which again is a bigger effect now in AGL Season 4. So yeah, TCOM was my fourth shout for what's benefited most from the changes. I think the TCOM deck is really good now. I really enjoy playing with it.
Nice. I think I would want to point out a couple more Aristos who have benefited here. I think that while she's only picking up the advantage from Hidden, I think that adding the advantage from Hidden to Dart is going to have a fairly significant effect on her overall gameplay. And I think it gives her enough of a boost that it makes her a more competitive ranged striker than she had been previously.
Yeah, I think we discussed Dart on the previous episode. If Dart started the game hidden, I think she would be brilliant. Well, maybe not brilliant, but she would get taken a lot more. She would be much more viable. Her main issue is it's so easy to take her off the table before she gets to activate because she doesn't start the game hidden. But the changes to hidden do really benefit her. That reroll is really strong, in particular with her generic switch, which is she can use any of her shields to cancel your shields, a bit like Legong. And because she's hidden, she can't take the damage if she gives away her shields. So I definitely think she's seen a buff. I don't think she's probably someone who's benefited the most, like some of the other things we've talked about.
The other one would be, and we've kind of touched on her a couple of times, but Eclipse. Eclipse gains a couple of benefits. First of all, like she is handing out the hidden state, even though she herself doesn't gain it a lot. She can, obviously, but it's not usually Eclipse that's becoming hidden. But the fact that hidden has been improved makes Eclipse better. But also, she's one of the aristos who relatively regularly hands out the marked state. And while the improvement to the marked state is not quite what I had thought it was, nevertheless, it is buffed, and I think it is a benefit for her.
Yeah, I don't think these changes will see the pick rate of Eclipse and Dart improve too much, but it definitely helps them. Okay, on the flip side then, who do we think has perhaps been most negatively impacted by these changes? Who might perhaps see their pick rates drop or be slightly less effective? I think I've got a whole group of people that I want to call out, and then maybe we'll get into some specific examples. But basically, anyone who's aggressive.
Yeah, I mean, all of the high frag aristos take a hit here, and I think that especially high frag aristos who don't necessarily also have good mobility. So I would contrast here, perhaps the likes of Miyamoto Musashi versus maybe Senor Massacre, or Major Luna versus Legong. I think Musashi and Legong still have excellent mobility, and I think that is going to keep their pick rates up. But I think that the likes of Luna and Massacre, who maybe don't have that same level of mobility, I think it's going to be a lot harder for them.
Why do you think that? Why do you think the mobility is going to affect them more now?
Oh, no! It's not that the mobility affects them more. It's that aristos who also have mobility on their side remain strong,
Okay.
even though their ability to frag is less significant than it used to be. Whereas the less mobile, high damage aristos are going to struggle to maintain their place in teams, if that makes sense.
Okay. I mean, I think that I would make an argument, and I'm going to make an argument, that Musashi has been the most negatively impacted by this change. I think he still remains strong for the reasons you say. I think his very good raw base stats, his high agility, his high brawn, his high initiative, and his high movement are going to keep him viable. But he's going to be much more flexible than he was because his killing power has been significantly reduced. Musashi has a reputation for being a horrible killer, as being able to score multiple frags in a round. And I have seen in a tournament Musashi take out all 4 of an opposing player's teams in one activation. I've done 3 in a tournament on Carnage as well, so it scored me a lot of victory points. I've never got the hallowed one at 4. But to do that, he really relies on cards. His base attack is decent at a red, an orange, and a blue, but it's not amazing. And it's not reliable at hitting his switches to attack again or to convert shields into successes. And to really get that Musashi train rolling, you wanted to throw cards at it. And so this is hurting quite a lot. Firstly, because you need to be a bit more cautious with giving your cards away because you're not picking them back out as frequently. And because you don't get to frag someone, draw a card, frag someone else, draw a card, frag someone else, draw a card. Very often you would use a card, frag someone, and then draw a card. So the net effect on your hand would be that you've still got the same amount of cards. And I think he's not going to be able to do that anywhere near as effectively, which is, I think, a good thing. He was a bit too strong and a bit too good at fragging. And even though I think he is the most negatively impacted Aristo from these changes, I still think he's going to be a top pick, even despite that.
Interesting. I see the point that you're making, and I would agree. I think that Musashi has always been less popular locally than he has seemed to be internationally, and that issue with his base dice pool, I think, has been a significant part of why we've often leaned into other strikers. But it's a good call. I see the point that you're making, that some of those real roll-ons were happening because of that ongoing dice draw.
Kind of snowballing effect that he would often have that could be really dispiriting for new players in particular. But
I'd argue that maybe the same thing could be applied to Wild Bill. So I guess his I guess he still has his card draw in his favor. At least he can still pull cards off of his switch.
He can, and I think Bill wasn't quite as effective at killing multiple people. It wasn't as easy to set up as Musashi, because the game does favour going to particular places, as we've already discussed. Musashi would just go to those places, and at Initiative 6, he'd just go first the next round and just attack all the people who were already in that place that they had to beat to score the previous round. You could set up some really horrible things with Bill, and you still can, especially with the Sterling Forge deck. But if the meta is shifted to a game where there's a bit more focus, I think, as they initially planned, on positioning and getting to places and holding places, Musashi's still really good at doing all that. He's movement 5, he's initiative 6, he's got good defense and 4 wounds still, and so he can get around the board still. He can still be very valid and viable in scenarios. He's just not quite as effective as before, in my opinion. But that's a good thing. I think that's a good thing.
Yeah, no, I would agree. I think that on balance, it is probably good that some of those more aggressive aristos are being taken down a peg or two. Certainly, or that whole style is maybe. I'm certainly looking forward to seeing fewer teams made up of 3 or 4 aggressive strikers.
Yes, I think they've still got a place. We've articulated why we think frags are important, but I think we'll see a bit more diversity. And in the tournament I ran, I appreciate it was a small sample size, 20 players, so 10 rounds for 6 rounds, so only 60 games. But we definitely saw some of those lesser taken aristos like Corey Queen and Eclipse. I anecdotally saw more games that were being won by the person with the lesser amount of frags. I think there was a really high correlation between frags and victories in the previous AGL. There is still a correlation, but it's lessened, in my opinion.
I think I had some of my first losses where I got more frags in that tournament myself. I'm not. It's possible I'm forgetting 1 or 2 previous occasions, but it certainly hadn't happened often. And I definitely lost a couple of games in that event where I had gotten more frags, and it was noticeable.
Do you think there's anyone else that has been negatively impacted? Musashi was really the only big one for me. Lei Gong, we already talked about. He loses that crit on the crit success. It's a minor negative impact, and he deserved it, quite frankly.
And to be fair, Lei Gong was more about his ability to simply pick and eliminate a single target every turn, and so he's never been able to achieve those same sort of chain killing sprees that Musashi was, as you pointed out, so easily able to set up, and while Bill could pull off as well. I think Luna loses here, and I think that's disappointing. I think that she is despite the fact that she has a reasonably good secondary ability, she is still pretty focused around her ability to assassinate at range, and it's simply not something that is as necessary as it was previously. And I don't know. I think she's somebody who needs a little bit of love, and she certainly hasn't gotten it this season.
Okay. Let's move on. We've been going a little while. Hopefully, listeners are still with us, and talk about the scenarios. So, I think very quickly we just need to talk about the change to Conquest, which is relatively minor. When you deploy from the bench in Conquest now, you can come back adjacent and not just in the scoring zone, and that makes it a little bit easier to come back and go and start contesting the zones and capturing them. I thought it was a good change, and there's been some discussion about whether that should be the kind of default on other scenarios like Assault, for example. But I think Glenn, again, an active user on the Discord, pointed out that really it's a huge benefit to Movement 5 Aristos, who can now come back from the bench and immediately move into a zone to contest it. And most of the Movement 5 Aristos are already pretty strong.
I don't disagree with that, but at the same time, the penalty from coming back when fragged is pretty substantial in a lot of scenarios, and I'm almost prepared to say that it's all right if some, or at least some of the Aristos can be competitive even coming back off of the bench. It's not a bad call that it disproportionately positively impacts the Movement 5 choices, but I don't know. I still feel like that's something that could be positive if rolled into at least Assault. At least Assault. That's the one where I feel like it could also have a positive benefit if it was applied there.
Yeah, I think the Movement 5 Aristos off the top of my head, Mushashi, Oberon, Axel, and Eclipse. I think they're the only ones. Have I forgotten anyone? Murtair, maybe? Murtair, yeah.
Murtair, yep.
So maybe we'll see a bit more Murtair and Eclipse because they're Movement 5.
And Parvati.
Oh, of course, yeah. Okay, so there's a few. I think some of those are already very strong and getting taken, and they get buffed up by this. So I think we need to see that in play a bit more. But when it comes to scenarios, I think the big one is Hunter and Prey. So shall I just try and give a relatively quick synopsis of this?
Yeah, if you give us the breakdown, and then I'll chip in with my thoughts.
Yeah, so in my head, this is a replacement for King of the Hill, which, as we've discussed, has been moved out of the tournament rotation this time. So the central zone is always the scoring zone again, and it's 2 victory points if you've got more than the opposing player in the central zone, and 1 victory point if you have the same number, as long as you've both got one in there. The deployment is something very new that we haven't seen before. So each person deploys in a pair of opposing zones. So if Jason and I were playing, I might choose zones 1 and 4, and he chooses 2 and 5. And we each deploy 2 of our Aristos in each of those zones. So you're a bit more spread out, and you can get into contact with one another much more quickly than you can in Assault, for example, where you're just completely opposite. The big thing here where I think it diverges from King of the Hill, and I think this was an attempt to try and get around the snowballing that happened in King of the Hill. Very often, if you started off strongly in King of the Hill, it was virtually impossible for your opponent to come back. And
yes.
I remember one notable game I had with a friend that was extremely close until it wasn't. It was, we were like 2-2 after the first round or something, and then I managed to kill like 3 of his Aristos in the scoring zone and be the only person in the scoring zone at the end of the turn, and all of a sudden I had 6 victory points and it was over. 6 more victory points. Now, the way Hunter and Prey tries to get around this is every time you eliminate an enemy Aristo, you get a frag token. Or a hunter trophy, as they call it, sorry. And if you eliminate someone with a frag token, you get hunter trophy. Sorry, you get victory points equal to that hunter trophy, as well as the 1 victory point that you get from taking them out. Oh no, sorry, you don't get a victory point when you take them out normally, do you? It's just
additional objectives.
Yeah, I don't think you get Oh yes, you do. Yeah, you gain 1 victory point each.
One victory point each time a character goes to the infirmary, and then you get extra victory points for each hunter's trophy that the enemy character had. So you're getting 1 VP for every frag, and then extra VP for each hunter trophy that they have when you frag them.
Yeah, so as an example, let's say Musashi has done some Musashi things, which, we've said he's less effective at, but he's killed 2 people, or fragged 2 people, so he's got 2 of these hunter trophies. If you manage to eliminate Musashi, you'll get the victory point for eliminating him, plus an additional 2 victory points because he had 2 hunter trophies from eliminating people himself. So I guess
when you go to the infirmary, those hunter trophies go away. So you don't keep getting 3 victory points for him every time you frag him for the rest of the match, unless he also gets some more frags.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting way to try and get around, like I said, that snowballing that could happen in King of the Hill, because by having the hunter trophies, if you just take someone out, it's a kind of... it can get you back into the game a little more quickly. I'm not sure it's really not that snowballing particularly well. Quite a few of the games of this scenario that we played in the recent tournament had quite big score differentials, much more than any of the other scenarios that got played. A particular shout out to the one game that finished 13 victory points to 6. And this was a couple of my local players who were playing each other, and I just asked them, did you just keep playing after the other person had stopped to get to 13 victory points?
No.
So my opinion of it is fun. I need to play it some more. I'm not sure on it at the moment. I don't think it stops that snowballing that happens in King of the Hill.
I think that with a little bit more experience, this is going to be a better version than King of the Hill. I think that once we've all got our head around it, we'll be able to exploit Hunter's trophies to get those extra points much more easily. But I think quite importantly, I have never seen this particular scenario go to round 5, not once.
No, let's have a look. No, so 8 of the 10 games were finished by round 3 in the recent tournament. All of them by round 4.
There you go. That doesn't even surprise me at all. Every game I have played of it has ended on round 3. It's very, very hard for either one person, either the person who takes the initial advantage to just keep accumulating points, because you're still getting 2 victory points each round if you've got the most Aristos in the middle. That's still significant. And you only need to add a couple of frags, and that's a 3rd round victory.
Yeah.
Or alternatively, if somebody does come out early and get some frags early on, I've seen people counterstroke, take out those Aristos who have the Hunter's trophies, and then instantly win the game in a single round.
Yeah, it's quite swingy. Like I said, I've only had the one game with it so far. And I have to admit that I lost the game. It was relatively close on the scoreboard, but I was completely outplayed. I made some mistakes in kind of drafting it, and Lei Gong just killed everyone, and I couldn't get back at him because he was just in smoke, and I couldn't see him, and he was just giving me the middle finger, basically. He finished the game with 4 frags, so had I been able to kill him, there would be 5 victory points there, but I just couldn't get to him. So I like the deployment. I think I'd like to see more of that. I think it's something that some people have missed, that you have to put 2 of your aristos in each of your deployment zones. You can't
Yes.
put 3 in one and 1 in the other, like you can on many other scenarios that allow you to use multiple zones. And this is the only one where you have a pair each. There's some scenarios where you can deploy in the 3s, so either in the odds or the evens, and some where you can just deploy in any, including adjacent to each other.
Yeah, the ziggurat missions in particular tend to have you've either got 3 zones to deploy in, or it's a free for all.
Yeah.
And those are both interesting ways to play. But it's true, this is yet another quite an interesting way of setting up the initial deployment. My problem with it is that you take that interesting initial deployment and you immediately funnel it into the center of the board. And I think that actually this is a waste of that interesting deployment style. I think that designing another scenario with the exact same deployment would be a better use of it, because I feel like a lot of the potential of that cool concept then just gets wasted because you're all running straight to the center anyway.
Yeah, I feel like a ziggurat scenario with it would be pretty interesting, actually.
Yes, I agree.
It's certainly interesting from a design space point of view. I'm interested to see them trying out. I think my review, if you like, of Hunter and Prey at the moment is it's okay. It's not a bad scenario. It's not one of my favourites, but I have only played it once. I'm definitely looking forward to playing it more. I tend to prefer the ziggurat scenarios anyway. I think they're a bit more interesting generally.
I tend to agree. Again, I've long been an advocate for the ziggurat missions as the connoisseurs Aristeia, but I think that Hunter and Prey is something that is going to mature with time as we all get more familiar with it. I think we are going to appreciate its nuances, and I think that it's going to end up being a much better version of King of the Hill, whereas at the moment I think there are a lot of people who feel that it's just the same thing basically.
I think what it does do is to try and discourage those aristos like Bill and Mushashi, who are fairly effective at racking up lots of frags on themselves. I think it's trying to encourage you to share them out as much as you can across your team. But yeah, we'll see how effective that is, I think.
Indeed we will.
Okie dokie. Well, quite a long episode. I hope everyone's still with us. Hopefully, we've given you a good overview of the changes in the new AGL document and our thoughts. Please do share them with us. We're pretty active on the Aristeia Discord, and I'll be sharing the links to the podcast once it's up on Facebook and so forth as well. So we'd really value any feedback, what you enjoyed, and on your thoughts on AGL4. How are you enjoying it?
Absolutely. Hit us up on the forum. Hit us up on there's the WGC Aristeia page. I'm also active on the Aristeia. There is an Aristeia the game on Facebook, and the Aristeia New Zealand and Australia pages. Obviously the main Corvus Belli forums, and if you are not yet a member of the Discord, then give us a shout out in one of those locations and we will share a link with you, because you should come and join the Aristeia the Game Discord community. It's a great place to just have really good conversations about this game that we all love.
Yeah, and if anyone isn't playing on Tabletop Simulator, we've mentioned that a few times throughout the podcast, do jump on. It's a really effective way of playing the game. The mod is really good, and you get to play people from all over the world, which is how Jason and I came into contact with one another.
Yeah, exactly. Opposite sides of the planet.
Absolutely. Okay, well, we will be back next week, or at least we'll be recording next week with Christmas and New Year. Perhaps it won't come out till the actual New Year itself, but we will do our top 5 Aristos episode sooner rather than later, within the next week, before Christmas.
Even if it's going to be a very different conversation to the one we would have had 6 months ago.
Absolutely. Okay. Well, good night to you, Jason, because it's kind of bedtime for you, and I'm going to go off for my day of work.
And good night to you, Jonah. Have a good one. And we'll chat again soon. Good
Okay.
night,
Bye.
everybody, and Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.